Love cannot be stored. Think about a time that you hurt someone you loved without meaning to. A friend, a spouse, a sibling, a parent. You forgot something important. You weren't fully present when they needed you. You let them down in a way that really bothered them. And they came to you to tell you how hurt they were. But as they were talking, another thought creeped into your mind. What about all the other times I did the right thing? All the birthdays I remembered. All the times I did show up. Haven't I built enough goodwill that this one mistake can be overlooked? And before you realized it, you stopped listening to their hurt, and you started preparing your defense. Love is measured by the way we show up again and again and again. Relationships aren't sustained by one grand gesture, but by returning over again and again and again. So even with your stockpile of good deeds, yesterday's faithfulness doesn't excuse today's absence. We show each other we care by our consistency of our love and our attention, not its quantity. Love cannot be stored. And if this is true about human relationships, it's also true about our connection to the divine. The Torah explores exactly this question in the story of Isaac. Isaac is journeying through the land that his father Abraham had once settled. He discovers that the Philistines had filled in every well that his father Abraham had dug, back when he traversed that same territory a generation ago. Isaac stops and digs and reopens the wells of his father. He digs the wells in the same spots as his father did, and he gives them the same names. But this time, as Isaac and his servants dig, they discover a well of living water, of Mayim Chayim. And this is another name for God in our tradition. Isaac has found God again, but this time on his own terms. Isaac's rediscovery of these wells, he uncovers the source that was already there. He followed his father's journey. He retraced the exact steps. But by reopening these wells, he makes them his own. This morning, we find ourselves in these 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, the Jewish calendar's annual season of mourning. The 17th of Tammuz is recognized as the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 CE. And Tisha B'Av recognizes the destruction of the temple and the end of temple Judaism and the sacrificial system as it was known. We spend these days remembering that destruction rarely happens all at once. Long before the temple fell, something had already begun to crumble. Our Haftarot, they change as well. For 3 weeks, we read from the prophets of Jeremiah and Isaiah. Now, instead of offering words of comfort or encouragement, they preach words of warning. These 3 Haftarot, they're called the Haftarot of admonition. They are selections of the wide tradition of prophets, calling desperately to the Israelites to change their ways and to return to their path of righteousness. Last week and this week, we hear and heard Jeremiah's voice. Jeremiah warns the people that they have turned away from their God, and they have turned towards idolatry and towards other gods. Their leaders have forgotten their purpose. And because of this, the community finds itself with a looming crisis. In this week's Haftarah, Jeremiah warns the Judeans about their wandering. He writes, "For my people have done a twofold wrong. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewed out for themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot even hold water. Jeremiah builds his rebuke around a simple image. God is a spring of living water, a spring that flows continually. It gives life without needing to be replenished. Instead, Israel has chosen cisterns, human-made reservoirs that collect yesterday's rainwater and hope it will be enough for tomorrow. Worse still, the cisterns are cracked. They can't even hold what they were built to preserve. At times, Jeremiah sounds like someone whose heart has been broken, reminding their ex of all they've lost. And this is not such a far-fetched way to read the text. In the beginning of the chapter of Jeremiah, we hear the words of young love. These are words that our High Holiday Choir sings so beautifully on Rosh Hashanah every year. Zacharti lach, chesed noraich. Go proclaim to Jerusalem, thus said God, I accounted to your favor the devotion of your youth, your love as a bride, how you followed me into the wilderness, into a land not sown. The story of Israel and their God is a love story. Throughout the Tanakh, God and Israel understand each other as romantic partners, as parent and child. Israel's turning away from God in this moment, according to Jeremiah, is a willful forgetting of all that God had done for the Israelites. God's deliverance and sustenance. Remember the devotion you had to me in your youth. You need to renew that devotion. You need to keep showing up for me and for each other, no matter how close your relationship was to God in the beginning. Jeremiah calls this sin twofold. Not only has the community strayed from their God, they have also begun relying on cisterns. Cisterns preserve yesterday's rain. They have their place, especially in the arid temperatures of Israel, the dry season being so long. But they can't replace a living spring. And when it comes to a relationship, we can't rely on yesterday's devotion either. Relationships that are renewed again and again, day after day, those are the ones that endure. And I think that this is what offends Jeremiah the most. That the Israelites, long after the honeymoon phase with their God, forget the outflowing of blessing from their source of living waters. Instead, they turn in other directions, not necessarily to find a better God, but to live on yesterday's covenant instead of renewing it themselves. These 3 weeks that we find ourselves in now, they're a period that the rabbis called Bein HaMetzarim, the time between the narrow straits. As we sit in these 3 weeks, we are challenged to sit with this image, that while we mourn the destruction of the temple and all of the brokenness of Tisha B'Av, we cannot ignore the fact that the cracks began to form long before that moment. Jeremiah reminds us that temples are rarely destroyed in one day. Jeremiah is warning them and scorning them for relying on cisterns, but he's also challenging them. Renew your covenant with God. Don't live only on the faith of previous generations. Make the covenant your own. The lesson of Tisha B'Av and these preceding weeks is to remind us, to warn us in our own generation, that we're the only ones who can renew this covenant for this generation. So what does it look like for a generation to renew its covenants? I know it requires us to have the courage to build communities that are centered on our values. That we should have deep respect for tradition and legacy, but we should not turn the past into an idol itself. It's sometimes easier to rely on the stability of precedent and tradition. Judaism encourages us and celebrates us to do that in many, many spheres of religious life. But if we do that at the expense of meeting the needs of our current moments, the tradition, it becomes no longer a tool to lead a religious life. It becomes the focus itself. And I know that each generation is tasked not only to maintain the traditions, but to make the covenant their own. To listen to the still small voice within ourselves and serve the community and God in our unique way. And this is why, when we recite our Amidah, we say Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, God of Sarah, God of Rebekah, God of Rachel, God of Leah. Grammatically, it would be just as easy to say God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But in saying it this way, we remind ourselves that each generation, and every generation, has to return to the well, to build their own relationship with the divine. It's not something that can be stored. You can't rely on the connections that your parents or your grandparents made. It has to be yours. In a week and a half, we'll sit together on the ground in our courtyard. We'll read the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations. Many of us will fast. Some of us will go to a protest. All of us will grieve the brokenness in our world. But by marking Tisha B'Av as a single day, as the 9th of Av, we have inadvertently created another moment, the day after Tisha B'Av. This is the day we rise up and begin again. Like Isaac reopening his father's wells, we begin the work of returning to the source. This is the day we return to the well. Shabbat Shalom. Let's continue with Musaf.